Greetings, I'm Karen Colligan, and welcome to the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. So, why do I care about leadership? As the founder of PeopleThink, and in my tenure as a leader, as a consultant, and as a coach, I've certainly seen my share of very good leaders and my share of very bad leaders. And I thought, it'd be great to share the wisdom from the very good leaders. Hence, the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. You're going to hear from a variety of leaders who are in a variety of roles, sharing their leadership expertise by answering the same 6 questions. Every single leader is unique in their style and approach, and we want to capture that uniqueness and provide you, the listener, with a diverse way of looking at leadership. So let's get moving and talk to our next leadership guest. In this episode, I am thrilled to be speaking to Joel Greenwald, Esquire, who is the founder of Greenwald Doherty, a counsel for employers. We're going to hear all about Joel's approach to leadership. So Joel, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you. I think that this is an important subject.
Yes, it is. Good. So Joel, before we get going, tell us a little bit about who you are and give us a snapshot of Greenwald Doherty before we even start the leadership conversation.
All right, thanks. Well, I'm somebody that considers themselves, at least professionally, to be an entrepreneurial attorney. I am in the legal game. Our firm, Greenwald Doherty, has been around 26 years. Mm-hmm. And we really have tried to be a different form of firm for clients than you normally see out there, in the sense that we are a concierge firm that prevents problems. And so we try to get ahead of it. We're a subscription-based firm. The majority of our clients are using us via subscription. We're big into the preventative medicine, whether it be learning and training and development for HR and for managers, or advice and counsel when problems actually do emerge. We're right there for them. Obviously we litigate and have done that for a period of years, but it's all on the business side of labor and employment law. That's it. We represent just businesses. We also are developing a training company called Signatrain, and Signatrain has live workshops and courses to help develop HR and trainers and train managers as well. But we're also developing a Knowledge Hub, which is an online portal. And one of the features of both parts of Signatrain is that we have industrial video that's really interesting in the sense that it was involved filming Broadway actors doing improv of different manager-employee scenarios and having some fun with it and being creative. And we've found that has really resonated with our audience.
Oh, there's no better way to learn than to have a few laughs along the way. That's for sure.
In a big way.
In a big way. And I have to say, doing the preventative thing, because when we think of attorneys, we don't always think of the preventative piece. So that's an interesting take around the business side of the house. So great. Love that. So thanks. Okay. So let's get into it a little bit, Joel. And my first question is, there are so many ways to define leadership, and it's so personal to each person. So give me an overview. How do you define leadership? I mean, you said you've been in business 26 plus years, obviously a leader in the industry. You're starting another firm, Signatrain. So let's talk about your leadership style.
Well, in 26 years of running Greenwald Doherty, it's always a work in progress. I don't care what kind of leader you are. You're always looking to get better, and what you think you don't know, and you have to keep your ears open and always work on yourself, try to improve. I think that certainly I always want to learn, but I also I want there to be positive energy in my operation. And if I'm not exhibiting that positive energy, then it's not going to resonate. And I realize that I have to set that example. But I think that kind of dovetails into what I think really is the most important fundamental aspect of leadership, which is really to inspire others. And what I mean by that is you can only do so much, okay, as an individual. That's the difference between being a solo shop and a business.
Mm-hmm.
Is you need to inspire the other members of the team to deliver upon your vision.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's something that I've continued to try to get better and better at.
Mm-hmm. Well, then that means you have to have your vision first, and you have to be able to articulate that vision. So, in fact, you can inspire and you give people a reason to stay.
Well, I think great leaders are great communicators.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you're not able to communicate, how are you going to inspire?
Yeah.
And you're right. The vision but a vision doesn't always have to be all that complicated. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But if it's complicated, you've got to make it simple.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay. And if it's simple, you've got to make it actually feel a little more dynamic to people too.
Yeah. Well, it has to be simple so I can remember it, and strong enough that I want to stay and be inspired by you.
Well, I also think people like to feel that they're part of something important, part of something special, and every business has something special to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Love that. So I'm curious about the values you use as a leader. So when I think of values, Joel, I think about, that's really our guiding light. It's how we make decisions, whether they're the easy decisions or the more complicated and hard decisions. And if we can be really clear about our values, then the decision-making process can be a little bit easier. The culture we're going to build in an organization gets easier. The vision we're going to set, the inspiration we're going to have. So what are your top 3 values?
I think you've got to be decisive. As a leader. I think that it's one thing to build consensus. And related to that, it's certainly important to gather other people's opinions. But ultimately, and this is something I think I've had to learn. And it's something that I've worked on hard because I always was interested in what other people wanted to do or thought, because I figured, well, that's the way you build a strong team. But ultimately, if you're wavering on decisions or taking too long to make decisions, you're actually undermining everybody. So I think that the first and foremost, I think I want to be decisive. I want to make decisions that have to be made. I think that doesn't mean you shouldn't respect other people's input.
Right.
I think you can gather other people's input, but ultimately a decision has to be made, and somebody or some group of people have got to make those decisions.
Yeah. And then you have to be responsible for the decision you made, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That goes without saying, but that doesn't happen if you don't make those decisions.
Exactly. Okay.
And I think early on in my career as a leader of my business, maybe I took too long sometimes.
Well, especially when you're a young leader, because you're trying to bring everybody into it. You want to make everybody happy. And as we grow in our careers, we realize, well, at the end of the day, not everybody's going to be happy, and we have to make the best decision for the business.
And I think people respond better to decisiveness. And they want somebody that has confidence in what they're doing, and also with the ability to potentially pivot. It's got to be kind of put out there, especially in an entrepreneurial company. One of your advantages as an entrepreneurial company is you could go around turns quickly. There may be adjustments, but you're going to be decisive when you're going to be decisive. It doesn't mean you can't change your mind. Maybe you do. You don't want to change it all the time, but you have the ability to do so. So that gives you some liberty there. But first and foremost, some decision has got to be made.
Yeah, agree with that. All right, what about number 2 value?
I think culture is king. Okay, I think there's no question in my mind that, it was Peter Druck who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So whereas I think strategy is huge, and you need to have a strategy that works and a strategy that is aligned with your vision. You've got to have a good culture. And, as an employment lawyer, I think a lot of times I see problems in organizations that we've represented that emanate from some cultural gaps. And so, to me, culture influences so much what goes on. There's no way your team can accomplish what you want them to accomplish if there's cultural issues. And everyone says, oh, I have a great culture. I have this and I have that. And I sometimes think that, well, maybe they're not looking too closely at some of the fundamental bones that breed a good culture. And for me, values is part of what makes a great culture, and in fact drives culture. One of the things that we've tried to do, and it's been a mission of mine, is to not only create values that really reflect what the business is all about, but values that ultimately aren't just posters on the wall,
Yes.
but that they're really part of our DNA, that we operationalize our values.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we hire off of our values, we manage off of our values.
Nice.
And I think that comes from a belief, and it really comes from my belief that culture is king.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Okay, so what's the third one for you? So we've got decisiveness, culture is king, and what's your third?
Walk the walk.
Ah,
Okay. It's one thing to set things out. It's one thing to ask people to do things. But if you're not doing the same thing, then nobody's going to respect it.
mm-hmm.
How could you ask people to work hard if you're not working hard yourself?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How could you ask people not to question things if you're not questioning things yourself?
Mm-hmm.
The idea really is, and also how could you ask people to be respectful or things like that if you're not respectful yourself? So you've got to set the tone. You've got to walk the walk. You cannot be perceived as a hypocrite.
And that whole idea that goes back to your values that you said you have to operationalize them. I mean, that's all part of walking the walk, because you wouldn't have, they're not slapped on the wall. You're actually trying to make them part of the organization, or have made them as part of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we do that is we set up a committee,
Mm-hmm.
and different stakeholders within different parts of the organization,
Yeah.
to help produce the values. And usually we're looking at what we've had, because I think we want to be able to adjust it every number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And because we want it to always really be accurate and reflect
Mm-hmm.
what we're all about.
Yeah.
And I think that to an extent, we took a crack at it recently because it was post-pandemic. And I think that we changed a bit
Mm-hmm.
in our mindset in terms of what was most important to us. I think we became grittier. We dived deep into learning and things that I think were there, but were more prevalent and more important to us. And once we have a draft of our firm's values that the committee comes up with, and I'm always a part of that committee, but there's people that are contributing quite a bit, if not way more than I am. And then we float it to another level of people to see what they think. And then they're ready to be unveiled. And then we have periodic meetings about the values where people volunteer to give examples of a particular value and what it means to them and how they interpret it. And then we have a discussion around it.
Nice. But
we really want to operationalize it.
Yeah. And what I know from my work in organization is people join an organization because of the values, and people leave an organization because of the values. That's why I left my last organization. Our values were no longer aligned, and I could not be there every single day thinking, well, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? And I ended up resigning because it just wasn't the right thing. So values are really, really critical. And it goes back to what you said in terms of your hiring process. I mean, that's part of what you can have conversations with, obviously, as you're hiring people. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, perfect. Let's move on to the next person. Absolutely.
And by the way, something you just mentioned, if somebody self-selects because the values don't align with their personal beliefs, is that necessarily a bad thing for an organization? I think it's a good thing.
It's a fabulous thing for the organization. Yes, absolutely. Because you need people to be aligned so that they can move forward in the same fashion.
Right. As an employment lawyer, from my standpoint, it's a lot easier if somebody resigns than if you have to take the action yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say you probably have a little experience in that.
Well, I think the other thing about that is that one of the other things that values, and this is going slightly off track, but I want to illustrate what I believe, that values are very, very important for companies in terms of performance management of toxic employees. So you have a toxic yet a high-performing employee. Values are a useful tool because it's essentially they can operate independent of a code of conduct or alongside a code of conduct to basically describe what behaviors are acceptable and not, or not. I mean, we do a bad enough job in this country or anywhere in terms of describing or evaluating somebody's poor skills at doing a job. It's a lot harder to actually get personal with somebody. So managers really don't have an easy time performance managing off of behavior. So I think values are a really important tool
Yes.
for that as well. Because a toxic yet high performing employee is a real dilemma for companies
Yes,
because maybe they have great sales numbers, but they're causing more havoc than maybe they're worth.
yes, exactly. I agree. All right, number 3. What is the best advice you were ever given from a leader?
Well, I've got to really point to my late father, who it's this month is actually the 12th anniversary of his death. So he was an important figure for me. He ran a small town drugstore. I worked in his store growing up in Pennsylvania. He always talked to me about, and well, I'll preface it, he had a really, I think, a loyal customer base, and people really liked him. And he always talked to me about listening to the customer. The customers want this. Maybe we should be doing this. You have to listen to the customer.
Okay.
And I think no matter what business you're in, you have to listen to the customer. Doesn't mean you always have to agree with everything, but you have to keep your ears open.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really good lesson to learn. And I certainly think about my dad often in many ways, but certainly in terms of the way he ran a business, how much he was cognizant about all the details, how he did things. And a lot of it came from his ability to be a good listener.
Certainly, if he's listening, well, they always say you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Unfortunately, not everybody pays attention to that. But by listening, you said he had a loyal customer base. So, Joel, they go hand in hand.
They do. They do. There's no question. And I think there's another piece I like to add because I'm just thinking of it as we're talking. But there's a book I read, probably, and maybe some of your listeners read it about 16 years ago called The E-Myth.
Oh, E-Myth Revisited by
they've had many editions of it by Michael Gerber.
Yeah, Michael Gerber.
And I thought that was probably about 15, 18 years ago. But I read the book and it changed the way I thought about things, about the leader really working on the business more than in the business.
Yes.
And that being a functional piece for survival. And that's the way to grow the business. And you have to keep moving. And I thought it was impactful to me. So that wasn't necessarily a leader giving me advice directly, but, kind of the same thing.
It's kind of the same thing. And you know that they continue to update that book to keep it more relevant for today. As we were just talking about you and your team revisiting your values, they do revisit that book.
Yeah, I've seen that because I've sent a few copies to people that I've met with in a mentorship capacity. And it was impactful for me. Because, sometimes you're used to just grinding and doing what you did to get you there. But if you're leading, you really have to take a step back.
Yeah, exactly. Love that. Great. All right. Number 4, currently going through an enormous amount of transition and change between the world events, layoffs, the economic implications of both of those. How do you lead through transition and change? You just brought something up about after the pandemic, you had to review the values and say, what has shifted for us. So what else do you do to lead through transition?
I think you're always listening to your people and seeing how things are affecting them. We've had a lot of changes in the last 26 years since we've been in business. There's been a lot of opportunity to revisit certain things and approach things differently. And I certainly want to run some of those thoughts by some key people, whether they be advisors or partners or things like that. But you've got to make changes, and you've got to be, once again, going back to one of my core values of leadership, you've got to be decisive about them. But sometimes there's a period of information gathering before you're decisive. And so when changes are going on in the world, you've got to, I knew early on in the pandemic that we were going to have to work remotely and go offline. I had a daughter that went to high school with the daughter was one of the very first people that was affected by COVID. The classes were suspended live earlier, maybe a few weeks earlier than other schools,
Oh,
because there was, initial situation there. And I think it gave me an opportunity to say, oh my God, this is
yeah.
not going to be a small thing.
Yeah.
Let's get more phones. Let's get the support staff working remotely, which we've never done before. Let's
Mhm.
plan to accomplish this within a week. But I think it was having my antenna up and reading the surroundings. And I'm somebody that reads an awful lot about world events
Mhm.
and things that are going on, trends. I love reading about things like that. So if
Mhm.
there are adaptations that we need to make based on circumstances, I'm not slow to that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the whole idea around transition is it goes back to what you indicated around decisiveness. I mean, not a lot of people like change. And when you start to see it happening, if you don't react soon, then it's only going to foster and get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's important to address it and let everybody else know how you're going to address it. No question.
Right. The communication's pivotal always,
Yeah, always.
in terms of leadership. But if you don't address these things, they'll find you.
Oh, yeah. I was in a leadership class, and one of the things I remember is they said, bad news does not get better with age.
No, no.
And
And sometimes you have to know yourself. Maybe you're not the best person on an aspect of change, and that you've got to make sure somebody else is helping to guide the organization through that. Let's say it's a technological innovation,
yeah.
and you're not as technologically
Oh,
sound as somebody else.
yeah.
Have somebody else run it, but the decision is still yours.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Hire the expertise. No question about that. I'm really smart in some things, and there's some things I'm really not that wise in. Hire the expertise. All
Well, I
right.
think that that's, just another leadership concept that I didn't talk about, but would maybe be my fourth value,
Okay.
which is to potentially, because I'm kind of thinking of these as we're speaking, and to me, another one is that I believe that a leader has to be properly self-actualized.
Yes. Yeah.
They really have to know nobody's good at everything.
No.
And what you're not good at, and this is I think fundamentalist to anyone starting a business for sure, is that you've got to surround yourself as quickly with as possible with people that do a good job at things you either don't prefer to do or just are not good at.
Hmm.
Be accurate
Yeah.
about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Oh, the self-awareness piece. I mean, if we don't know who we are, what are we great at? What I always say, what are you great at? What do you suck at? And how do you build the bridge between those two? Often find somebody who does who does those things better than you do. Yes.
And for me, I think that was something I did pretty well because using your terms, I think I know what I suck at, and
Yeah.
I think I know what I'm good at, and and
Yeah.
and and I was able to put myself in a position to be surrounded by some people that have been with me since the beginning.
Ah,
I've
nice.
got some people that have been with me for 25, 26 years,
Wow.
and I was lucky, but they to this day, have different personality profiles
Uh-huh.
and have skills that I don't have.
Well, that's a tribute to you. Holy out. It's like your dad, the loyalty thing. You must listen to him, Joel. You must actually do what you say you need to
Well,
do.
I try. I mean, you can't always do what you want to do, but you do your best you can,
Yeah.
and you don't beat yourself up over it. And I also think that we're gonna make mistakes.
Yes.
That's okay. You can't be swallowed up on that by that and live in a world of regret. You've got to move forward.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Our fifth question you kind of answered already, but let's get a little clarity around it. And the question is, we know the best leaders are curious and always want to learn. So what do you do? What are your tools and resources? And you said you love to read, you love to understand what's going on in the world, you love to look at the trends and what's happening. What else do you do? Is there anything else along those
Well,
lines?
like I said, I read business books, but I also I like those summaries of business books because
Oh,
I don't always
absolutely.
get around them, like
Yeah.
Blinkist and those kinds of things. I think those are really good tools.
Agree.
And I because not everybody's got a lot of time, but I am somebody that when the internet first, this dates me, but when the internet first came out, I was so excited. I was the type of kid that used to like reading encyclopedias versus novels. I love
Me
information.
too. Yes, I used to love that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So for me, the internet is, we hear all the time about all the bad things it does, but the fact that you have all that information at your fingertips
Yeah,
is really amazing if you know what to do with it. So I'm reading newspapers, periodicals, searching for different articles on subjects that I'm interested in and reading
yeah,
about that. And that actually is something that relaxes me and I enjoy doing.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Okay, good.
Yeah, filling my head with knowledge is something that I enjoy, and I'm more of a nonfiction fan than a fiction fan.
All right, the last question. What piece of art or music or literature or whatever else keeps you balanced and brings you joy? With joy being the operative word here. Because when I think about leadership, it can't just be about the functional component of it. How do we bring that whole person and where's that joy come from? So, where's the joy come from, Mr. Joel?
I think that for me, it's seeking enjoyment from the outdoors.
Mm,
I walk a lot, clears
mhm.
my head.
Yeah.
I think a lot when I walk, and that's important. I like hiking in the woods.
Mm,
I like walking by the seashore of it that the occasion presents itself.
yeah.
I like kayaking and boating activities, which in the Northeast where I live, you can do much more in the summer. I mean, in at least 6 months of the year. I also, related to that, I love sports. If I'm not playing them, I love watching them. I find it's kind of the truest last form of drama, sports television, where you don't know the ending actually. So I really enjoy that at times. I'm not inundated with it, but I do like it. And especially a sport that's outdoors, that's a lot of fun. When I'm inside the whole day, I'm not as happy as a day that I'm outdoors too.
Okay, good. I love that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So, Joel, thank you so much for your insight and thoughts about leadership. I've interviewed a lot of leaders, and it's so inspiring for me and for the listeners because everybody's so different, as they should be, unique in their own way. Really grateful for your very wise words. So, thank you, Joel.
Karen, thank you for having me on. I appreciate the questions. I'm always learning. So if I could share in any way to help somebody else learn, that's a great thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Gotta love that. Okay, everybody. So thanks for listening. And I'm Karen Colligan, and you've been listening to Joel Greenwald, the founder of Greenwald Doherty, a counsel for employers. If this leadership podcast was of interest to you, go to our YouTube channel, People Think SF, and look at all the other distinguished leaders I've had the pleasure of interviewing. You'll learn so much about the uniqueness of leadership. I know I have. And don't forget to share with your colleagues. Till the next episode of the Let's Talk Leadership podcast, have a good one. And don't forget to keep it real. Editing by Mary Lee Williams. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye now.